There you go. I muted myself.
No, it's okay.
Everyone's like, oh, it is our favorite day of the week. Yeah, she was just trying to say it's our favorite day of the week.
Yep.
Tuesdays. I love it. On Tuesdays, we have Makeup or Breakup with me and my buddy Lou. And we take on all the relationship issues of we talk about makeup or breakup, but we also talk about dating, because healthy dating will lead to a healthy marriage or long-term relationship.
Sure.
And maybe you can avoid that major breakup or divorce again, right? Sometimes I think it's healthy to have those breakups early on in life so that you get experienced with like heartache and how to disengage from people that aren't really working out.
Right.
But one of the things I love about the show is we talk about self-respect and what you like to say, which is
self-care.
Right. And when we talk about self-care, it sounds very kumbaya, but I just want to talk about it for a few minutes.
And it sounds selfish. People go, oh, I can't take care of, I got too much else to take care of. I can't take care of myself. But it's the old thing they tell you on a plane, put your mask on first. You're no good to anybody else if you're not right.
Right. And how many times have we said to ourselves when we have a friend that's poorly dating, he just should not even be in the dating world right now. Like how many times have we done that? Or we say, you know, our friend Emily, who picks the worst guys out there, we just feel like saying, you know, I don't know if one of us should speak to her or not, but like she almost needs to just be told flat out.
Yep.
Seeing things, it doesn't look right. You're going down the wrong road. So when we talk about makeup or breakup, when we talk about breakups here and we talk about self-care, we're also talking about self-respect. Mm-hmm. And I think before someone can really understand self-care, which is caring enough about yourself, it really comes down to self-esteem and self-respect. Don't you think?
Yes. And you talked about I think Katie was the name you used, but that woman who always dates the same guy, or that guy who always dates the same girl. Mm-hmm. Not what that is about is his choices respond to the problems he has with himself. And,
right.
You know, if he or she fixes themselves, does a little self-care, builds their own selves personally, they avoid those same old traps and the same old people, because they keep dating the same person because that's the person that responds to their issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, so I'll give an example. You and I like to share a lot transparently, off the camera. We've done that as friends, but also on the camera. We talk about our past relationships, even our past marriage. So it's funny because I was thinking about this topic today because I wanted to talk a little bit about it before I move on to talking about kids and discipline and how kids are affected by these breakups, which some of it's obvious and some of it isn't. But when I was thinking about self-esteem and self-care, I don't remember, but I've probably shared this once or twice in our several years together, but I'll never forget, you know, when someone is so bluntly honest with you, it's kind of shocking because most people don't do that. We talk behind each other's backs, but
sure.
Like you and I might be having great conversations about, you know, Bob the Builder in, make something up in Kittery, Maine, and his crappy dating. And maybe you and I know Bob the Builder, but you and I are talking about it because we're so frustrated. We don't feel empowered to speak up. And we both, I don't know about you, but I've had that experience of speaking up and then it backfires because the person doesn't like what we said.
Sure, yeah.
But when I was in my early 30s, I had gone through my divorce a year or two earlier, and I was dating a guy that was definitely not a great fit, but I was trying to make it. It wasn't square hole, round hole, or square peg, round hole.
Yeah.
It was somewhere in between. So one time it got a little bit volatile, and the bottom line was that he had some very compartmentalized ways of looking at relationships, and even like the tidiness of his house and things like that. And just very, I looked at it as very controlling, but really it was, it's just his way. Like he just didn't like messes, and he'd never had kids. And I tried to overlook that. And when things got really rocky, my next door neighbor, who was many years younger than me, and he was in kind of a bad relationship himself, but we didn't know it at the time. But anyway, he bluntly said to me one time, he goes, "Judith, you know what your problem is? You suck at breaking up." And I was like, wow, that is like the most blunt, crazy thing anyone's ever said to me, because it's true. And I didn't know what to do with it. I thought about that for days, and I'm like, and at first I was thinking, yeah, well, it's because I've been dating this guy for like, a year and a half. That's why, like, I'm entrenched now, but then when I looked back on it, I'm thinking, no, there were other guys that probably weren't, could have been let go sooner, and he'd seen that I hadn't.
Right.
So what he was watching was, once again, I'm in a difficult relationship, and he's listening to me talking about these difficulties, which is basically like complaining about, God, this guy Bill is killing me, kill Bill. So it's sometimes interesting when friends have to point the obvious thing out, because in my mind, I was being a really great date. Like, I wasn't just going to break up with you, Lou, because we've been going out for a couple of months or whatever. And in my mind, it's like, well, I have to give you the benefit of the doubt. And since I liked you enough to date you for 2 or 3 months, I probably should stick it out for another 2 or 3 months, because it's not super egregious, but there are differences.
Right.
And I think when it comes to self-esteem and self-care, you have to ascertain, like, how, I hate to say it, but how annoying are those differences? Like, the tidiness became a really big issue for us. Like, I know it sounds weird, but it really was. And I'm not a slob, but I'm not like a super neatnik. Like, have you ever had that experience where you yourself maybe should have broken up sooner, or you saw your friends?
Oh yeah, all the time. But let's take that a step further. Why do we suck at breaking up? We suck at breaking up because we prioritize the relationship over our own needs. And we do that for a couple different reasons. Either for some reason we think we deserve it, or for some reason we think that this relationship is more than we deserve, or for some reason we think this will be the last relationship there ever is. And that's why we suck at breaking up, because we have all these thoughts and fears that we're battling. And the one thing we're not paying attention to is this relationship isn't working for me. Yeah.
Well, and I think, one of the major issues, if you looked at all of those reasons that could be out there, when we talk about self-esteem and confidence and whatnot, we also are talking about the confidence to trust our gut.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times have you been in a situation, even if it wasn't a relationship, but it was maybe it was a relationship with a contractor or something like that, and your gut says, fire the contractor and get another carpenter. Your gut says, I don't have to keep paying this person the other half. I can not pay for the other half of the roof, and I'll find another roofer to finish the job.
Right.
But we always feel obligated, especially if there's money involved, or in a relationship. I think sometimes, the self-esteem sort of comes in, well, we're supposed to compromise. But I don't know. That's, compromise is something that you do once you're in a relationship. And that's something that I try to teach my clients. Compromise comes later on. Up front, you don't need to compromise as much. So for me, I don't know if you ever had this problem, Lou, but for me, looking back, I can reflect honestly. My thing was, for whatever reason, in my teens and 20s, I learned and heard the message, love is compromise. Love is, it's not all you and it's not all their stuff. You have to sort of commingle, and you have to learn how to compromise. But for me,
nobody taught me wrong. That's not wrong, by the way.
But nobody taught me like what that really looks like.
Yeah.
So, I mean, did you ever have that? Like, maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I think it's important for people to understand you don't have to compromise on a lot. At the beginning, you shouldn't be doing a lot of that.
But I think what we're talking about is relationship balance. And I think everyone can take a look at, because they can't do it unbiasedly about their own relationship, but everybody has friends, and all their friends have relationships. And just in your own mind, if you're out there listening right now, think about how many of the relationships that are unbalanced. In other words, one person is in control, one person's hanging on, and that's a little bit stark. That's a little bit stark, but it's usually the case. And by the way, that's usually a male-female dynamic, by the way, but not to get into that too much. But you see a lot of unbalanced relationships, and compromise comes in a balanced relationship. And that is so hard to achieve. And it usually doesn't happen overnight, and it usually doesn't happen by chance. you're usually looking for that balanced relationship, things like that. And I don't know, my relationship now is balanced, but I've had to fight for it. And it's something I wouldn't have done when I was younger because I didn't have that, I didn't have that feeling that I could, I should accept what I have. I like this person. I'm very attracted to him. This is a great relationship. I got to do whatever it takes to make it work. And that's generally how you feel when you're young.
Yeah. So, all right. So looking back to, my son's dad, when we first were dating, he had a small cottage up on a lake in New Hampshire, about 25 minutes from Sunapee Lake,
Yep.
Lake Sunapee. And I went up there and I thought it was lovely, but to be honest, I'm an ocean person.
Right.
I mean, part of it is I actually love the soothing effect of waves. I have to be honest, and I grew up in Maine in the summers, and I just fell in love with like salt water. To me is like everything. It's clean. It's, the saline, it's just got this health benefit. I mean, every time we got horrible poison ivy, we had to bring buckets of it home so that, like if we got poison ivy and it was the month of September, we would be up there on weekends.
Right.
And so we would bring a bucket of salt water home because it was what would really dry out and soothe, the poison ivy.
Right.
And early on, when we were up at my ex-husband at the time, boyfriend, when I was at his lake cottage, once or twice he made a little comment, and it wasn't meant to be demeaning or controlling, but he said, I said, I made a comment like, wow, it's so pretty and peaceful up here. It's so nice. It's enjoyable, which it was.
Yep.
And he made a comment to the effect of, so, whoever marries me, whoever I marry or I settle down with has to really love this lake because this is part of me.
Right.
And it comes with the package kind of thing. And I remember at the time I took it in a positive way. I'm like, oh, that's great because I guess I'm in the running because I like the place. Right.
Right.
But what I didn't hear was that means most weekends, because I own this place, most weekends are expected to be here on the lake.
Right.
And so over time, when we got married, a few years later, over time, it became an issue for me, but it was this undercurrent, pardon the pun, because I wasn't able to analyze it well enough. I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And part of it wasn't just the ocean, but it was all my family time, because whenever we were in Maine, we would stay at the family house.
Right.
And so what I was missing is my family time and my connection. And that ended up really, falling by the wayside. And it took me several years after my divorce to, get my ground back, to gain my ground back with my cousins. And really, I would say today I'm a lot closer than I was during my marriage back then in my 20s and early 30s, but it's never been the same.
Well, let me ask you from your perspective at that point, was there a compromised position, or did you just you didn't want to give up time on the ocean to be at the lake? Would there have been a percentage of time at the lake that would have been that you would have been okay with?
Yeah, so I definitely enjoyed going to the lake, but I had the impression that he felt uncomfortable around my family. He was kind of quiet, and I think he felt a little intimidated. So I sort of unconsciously stopped pushing for that.
Yep.
And kind of made that unconscious decision, I guess, in some respects, to not spend as much time in Maine. I would try to go there on my own, maybe like once in September or something like that.
Right.
But I also did the same thing with parties. So I was known for having theme parties. It started in college. I don't know what was wrong with me, but no, I'm going to say in a positive way. I always felt like 25 people standing around in someone's condo or apartment or dorm room was kind of stupid and useless. And, other than the fact that there was a keg somewhere nearby, it was kind of useless. So in my mind, I was a creative person. I was an art major as well as, a writing journalism major. My feeling was parties should have a theme. So I get out of college and I'm still having theme parties. Like no matter what it is, it may not include dress up, but this is a theme party. And certainly Halloween parties was an obvious, right? Because there's a theme right there, and there's costumes involved.
Sure.
But my husband didn't like that. He wasn't outgoing. He just wasn't into that kind of stuff. He probably stopped dressing up for Halloween as soon as his parents stopped taking him out at age 10, you know?
Yep.
He's just that guy. And there's nothing wrong with it. But I sensed that he was uncomfortable with like these parties that I had and whatnot. And so instead of figuring out a way for him to compromise a little bit, for us to have a relationship where I could still have my theme parties, but maybe there could have been fewer people or whatever. I just slowly stopped having my parties.
Yeah.
And so in both cases, what I'm doing is giving up my need for socializing.
See, that's a very basic problem in relationships where you just basically have basic different personality differences.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an ocean guy. I live on the ocean, but I see the beauty in just being up at a cabin. For my son's commencement last Friday, we rented an Airbnb on a lake up there in Vermont at the end of a dirt road. And it's like, oh, this is great. Just a little isolation, but not everybody goes for that so much. And, I'm not a party guy either. I can go and, I can find my way at a party, but wouldn't be my first choice on a given weekend, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we have, as couples, we all have to deal with different personality types quite often, or make a point of prioritizing what's important to you and keep going until you find the personality type that fits what's important to you.
Right. So, and it's so interesting because then my second husband was from Hyannis and he loved the Cape. That he was a Cape boy.
Mm-hmm.
And, not so much for the purpose of like his family. He was sort of disconnected with his family. That was sort of a flashing yellow light that I should have turned it into a flashing red light sooner than I did.
Yeah.
But that's a topic for another show. But so now I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is great. There's a guy from the Cape. But the problem is, where does he like to go? And when he thinks ocean, he thinks
the Cape.
Right. When I think ocean, I think
Maine.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And again, I married someone that was, not good in crowds, very uncomfortable around, my talkative family and whatnot. For whatever reason, I don't know. These two guys, were well liked. It was their own insecurities,
Yep.
Yep. They didn't have like huge family interaction type stuff. I mean, when I look back, like my first husband had one sister who lived further north in Vermont than his parents. So while we would see his parents quite a bit, I loved his sister and husband and whatnot, but they were that much further up. So that was more of a trip to see them. Second husband, same kind of thing. He's not close with his family. So even though we'd be on the Cape, a lot of times we'd be down there, we'd be visiting his best friend and his best friend's wife, but we would have hardly anything to do with his family other than occasionally maybe stopping in to see his mom. So here I am making these assumptions, this is a guy that loves the ocean, blah, blah, blah. But it turns out he's actually more of a swimming pool guy. And this is hilarious in my personal opinion. He grew up in Hyannis with 3 siblings and none of them got swimming lessons.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So had I known that before we got married, I would have said, these are some flashing yellow flags right here, like flashing yellow lights. Somebody's waving the flag. Like there's some issues. There's some weird things going on. It's great that you're going to go hang out with his best friend. And that's, but why is it that you hardly ever stop in and see a sister or the mom, that kind of thing.
Right.
And for, in his particular case, there was a flashing red light, but I overlooked it. So when we had been dating for a year, if you can imagine this, now he lived in Wellesley, I lived in Lexington. So both of these roads are right on Route 128.
Yep.
And they're not way up where you are, up on the North Shore. These are like, near Waltham,
Right. And
at the 1 year mark, we just happened to be talking on the phone one day when he was on his way home or something. And he said something about, he was alluding to engagement and rings and things like that. He was trying to get an idea from me on stuff. So I decided that would be a good opportunity at the 1 year mark to say, hey, speaking of rings, an engagement. This is so exciting. And, whenever you want to pop the question is fine by me. Like, you get the green light there. I don't want to know when, and just do it, make it a surprise. And lo and behold, that conversation that started out super innocuous, just a phone call on the way back to his house, turned into such a big fight that he hung up on me. And the fight was me trying to carefully approach the topic of meeting his family.
Yeah.
And honestly, I knew that he had mentioned early on that he doesn't have much to do with his family. He doesn't feel like he has a lot in common with them. He's not that close with them.
Right.
He had a lot of grudges against his brother, because his brother, went to college for a little bit and then dropped out and came home and never left. Well, yeah, okay, but at the same time, he's looking after your mom. So, what do you care? Like, what do you,
right.
He's not taking up a lot of space.
Right.
And he is helpful to a certain degree. So there's a companionship and there's a codependency that's probably working for them, So yeah, this conversation. So I knew that I had to sort of tiptoe into it, which I didn't like it, but I just said to myself, sometimes you have to tiptoe into a conversation.
Yeah.
You can't be a bull in a china cabinet like you like to be all the time. So I consciously was tiptoeing into it by saying, hey, I thought this was the perfect opportunity. Hey, thanks for hinting about the rings and stuff. And hey, while we're on the topic of rings and engagement and whatnot, do you think maybe sometime, like maybe in the next few months, and I think this was like springtime.
Right.
So it's perfect. There's no excuse of like snowstorms. Hey, do you think over the next couple of months, maybe we could go down to the Cape and I could meet your family? And it was like radio silence. I'm like, oh my God, like total silence. And I'm thinking to myself, we've been dating for a year and we're talking about engagement, like total silence. Like you have no reaction. Well, what it was is when
he had a reaction.
He had a reaction, but his reaction was always to shut down.
Yeah, exactly.
So this was like this was the beginning of seeing that. So he goes silent and I'm like, hello. I'm like, not this weekend, like sometime, before we get married. Like, you've met my family, like after like the 4th month, I introduced him, and my family really liked him. He did well with my family. Things seemed pretty on board to me.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I told you I'm not that close with them. And I'm like, well, unless they're like axe murderers or they're showing up on the milk carton, like I'm not necessarily going to break up with you based on what you're going to tell me ahead of time about these people.
Right.
But the reality is, especially like your mom and, he had a sister down there that, he didn't really have much of a relationship with, but there wasn't any real negative reason.
Right.
Like, and the sister that lived in the next town from me in Woburn was the one he really didn't like. So I'm like, well, she's up here. So, okay, I get it. I'm never going to get to meet the person that's 15 minutes away. But what about the person that's, that you don't hate as much, that's down on the Cape? But I'm telling you, he hung up on me. He was so mad at me.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Everybody's got this stuff. There are tender areas. There are problem spots. There are problematic areas of their lives. In this case, it was his family.
Yep.
Which I understand to a degree, because my relationship with my family wasn't antagonistic, but it wasn't particularly close or warm either.
Yep.
And what happened was his stuff ran up against your stuff because you're very family oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And you took his stuff with his family as, I'm guessing you probably took it personally, because why doesn't he want me to meet his family?
Right. Like that's a normal thing to do when you're about to be engaged.
Right. Right. And I'm guessing from him, and you knew him, you married him, so you know him better than I do. I'm guessing from him, he's a person who is trying to escape that and trying to have life outside of his family. And when, for him, going back, being involved with the family drags him back into all the problems he had to fight with when he was younger. And he's just not willing to do it.
Right. And he had such, anger and negative feelings toward his brother for quitting college and coming home and, never going back to college and never really doing much with his life. I mean, it wasn't just dropping out of college, because college is not for everybody, for sure.
Right.
But, the reality is, when I started to learn more from the sister that he didn't like, because I eventually met the sister he didn't like, so that was pretty hilarious. And I liked her a lot. I'm like, oh no.
Yep.
Like, if she were a guy, I would have said to myself, oh man, I'm dating the worst brother in the family and I should be dating this guy. Like, she was very practical, but which he didn't like.
But here's what compromise comes down to. We started talking about compromise. You have to have a feel, and this is part of working on yourself too, by the way. You have to have an understanding on what your stuff is.
Right.
And you have to have an understanding on what their stuff is, and whether it's compatible. Now, the earlier example where you talked about going to the lake or going to Maine, that wasn't about the lake or Maine either. That wasn't the stuff that was being touched. The stuff that was being touched was you were being isolated from your family.
Right.
He had this desire to isolate himself from socializing at all. Going to a lake in the woods and sitting at the quiet lake is his way of getting away from socialization. Right. That's his stuff. He didn't want to socialize. Your stuff is you wanted to be with your family. So those two areas of stuff were in conflict. You couldn't serve each other's needs that way.
Exactly.
So, and the lake or the beach is a good conversation point, but it's just symptoms. It's just basically your need to be with your family and his need to be in a quiet, peaceful place away from, social anxiety, which I'm guessing he dealt with.
Right. And the other thing is, so remember, at that time with my second marriage, I was in my 40s. And, it could be different for people in their 50s and 60s. Obviously, like, meeting the family isn't such a big deal.
Yeah.
But when you're in your 30s and 40s, you do want to meet the family that you're going to be marrying into. And here's the thing, and it did end up playing out.
Yeah.
The one thing I know from experience is that you may marry someone that has several siblings and they say, I have nothing to do with them. I'm not close with them. And I see my mom every few months, but I just go to visit her.
Yep.
Well, that's fine. And this is why I tell everybody, do not be so naive like I was, because it's fine until there's a family issue. So if his mother had a health issue, we all would have been congregating in that living room in Hyannis.
Yeah.
Right. But what happened was, no, it was his younger sister, by a few years. I mean, she wasn't that much younger, but she was younger and had kids that were maybe 3 kids, 8 and under.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Maybe even 7. And her husband, I mean, they were in their probably late 30s, early 40s. And her husband dropped dead of a major heart attack in the kitchen one day.
Yeah.
So now the family has to all come together for this event. Not only that, but she was incapable really of parenting on her own. She has some mental illness. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, have I talked about this before?
No, actually, no.
Okay. So even though friends, including some of my family, would say to me, you know what? Like, before I got married, I explained to, some of my close friends and my family, I said, I'm just having some really kind of worried about this. Like, I don't know. Do I want to marry someone that isn't close to their family members? The one that he did like was this younger sister.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody liked her husband. But they kind of put up with the guy, because even though he was a bit of an idiot and, like he'd go out and have beers with his buddies like 3 or 4 nights a week. And that's hard because she wasn't able to parent easily. Right.
Yep.
What they did like was that she had found somebody. She had a family. He was a good provider. They had a house. I mean, they weren't like totally destitute or anything.
Right.
He had a life. He wasn't always the nicest guy, but she had, overall, on a scale of 1 to 10, she probably had a 7 of a life. Right. But now you have this situation where not only are we dealing with like a funeral and all of that, but she's not able to parent these kids. And she's just overwhelmed. She was definitely medicated. I don't know what her problem was, if she had anxiety or if she was depressed, because she always seemed like she was doing the equilibrium shuffle. Like I was like, something's not right. She was always so, yeah, like if you asked her a question, this was the answer. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I did. I went, I'm like, if that's as fast as you can answer me, something's not right. And it was all the time. It was like she was in a fog.
Yeah.
That's what it was. She was in a fog. And that was before her husband passed away. So now, fast forward like a couple of months, and the family, especially the sister I liked in Woburn, who was very assertive and very put together. In fact, she was a social worker. So she got emotions and, how to relate better than anybody in that family. And she saw the dysfunctionality. She takes it upon herself to figure out these kids need help. The sister needs help. We all need to figure out how to help. So because she's a social worker, she went to a social agency down in Hyannis.
Right.
Like family services or whatever they had down there.
Mm-hmm.
Something to that effect. And the next thing you know, we are all asked to participate in a family meeting on behalf of the sister, and she would be there. The mom, who was also out of it, like the sister, I don't know what was going on there. She acted that way and she wasn't medicated. So I don't know. She said like all of 10 words the entire time I knew her. Also a flashing yellow light. But we all got into this room and there were like 3 facilitators. And they basically stood up in front of this great big whiteboard in this room, in this plaza where they had their offices. And they said, we're all here on behalf of Hoosie. And thank you for all coming. This is a really great effort that we see you all putting in. I felt like saying, yeah, especially since I just drove all the way down from Lexington for the day,
Yep.
And while we were progressing through it and they were talking about the issues at hand and she needs help with all kinds of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
They basically said, now we really want to empower you, the family members, the ability to manage like who does what. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to ask for someone to volunteer and come up and lead yourselves with, we've given you ideas of the different areas that she needs help with. So maybe somebody's going to cook meals. Someone might take the kids one night a week.
Yeah.
Different things like that. So now, when you're talking about this group where like my husband would go dead silent whenever he was like, confronted with something that he wasn't comfortable with, and a mom that said all of 10 words, she was only like 72, by the way.
Right.
She said all of like 10 words whenever I'd be sitting in her living room for like 2 or 3 painful hours.
Right.
And nobody's
getting some insight into what he's dealing with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, also I could see where he learned his silent treatment, because that was his way of like fighting back. Always, it was the silent treatment.
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk things out. I'm just going to go silent. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my God, how long are we going to sit here? It was the most painful silence. And I think that, for myself, when I run support groups, like one of the things that I've been trained in is sit with the silence.
Yep.
You ask a question, you don't need to jump in right away, because usually the quiet person, if they see that no one's going to speak up, that is the one time that they will jump in. Okay. So that's, scientifically proven. So it's never an easy 10 seconds for me.
Right. Yep.
And what I always end up doing in my support group is I end up just calling on people. I'm like, okay, now I'm going to be like, Sister Mary, I'm going to like call on you guys one by one.
Yep.
So too bad. You should have just volunteered when you could have.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So Lou, it was the most awkward thing I've ever sat through. And they're like, look, this is your family. You guys need to be the ones that manage it from this point on and take assignments, write them up on the whiteboard. And then somebody takes notes down here at the desks,
Right.
Well, I finally was like so uncomfortable with it. So I finally said, raised my hand. I'm like, all right, I'll do it. Cause I figured all I had to do was stand up there and like, look at everybody and go, okay, first item, somebody do it, or I'm going to assign it. because that's just how I roll.
Yep.
But afterward, I really started to think about it when I was done with that process, and I sat down, and when we got out to the car, we were there all day. They actually provided lunch. We had a lunch break so that people could go out and make calls if they had to, and they could also just take a breather and like eat a sandwich.
Yeah.
And they provided that. So at the end, I don't know, we didn't get out of there till like 3:30. I was so stressed out from the whole thing. And as soon as we got in the car, I'm like, well, that was a shiitake mushroom show.
Yeah.
And my husband's like, what are you talking about? He starts getting all stressed out, and he does this thing where he twitches and he gets really quiet. And I'm like, oh God, here we go. Right. I'm like, it's your family. You only have 3 siblings. One's husband just died, and it's not for her to speak up in this meeting. Your elderly mom never speaks up, and nobody's going to expect her to say, oh, I'll take Tuesdays and Thursdays, because she was just sort of out of it,
Yep.
But your sister, like your brother, like, I don't think there were any friends in the thing, but I'm like, you think you're better than everybody. So like, and we definitely like had the bigger income of household income. So like you could have signed up for like, I'll pay for a caterer to like make her 6 dinners a week. I don't know. I'm like, hell. I'm like, and then I started to get really ticked off about it. The ride home from the Cape was miserable,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I'm just saying, like, what the hell's wrong with you people? Like, did it not feel weird to you? Like that I was the one that stood up to do it? Like, I can't believe none of you said, no, Judith, that's all right. Like, no, we got it. And somebody makes a joke of it and stands up.
Well, it gives you an idea of the dynamics that have been going in that family for decades.
Right.
At that point.
And that's when I just really like said
that
to
was
myself,
a nightmare for your husband right there. It was an absolute nightmare. Because the last thing he wanted to do was socialize with his family, and this was committing to socializing with his family.
Right. But at the same time, Lou, he really cared about that particular sister.
Yeah.
In fact, she was the only one that came to our wedding. I don't think he invited the others. He may have invited his mom. I think he did invite his mom, but she didn't want to get on an airplane. And her excuse was she doesn't like to sleep in beds that she's not familiar with. So she didn't like to travel is really what it was.
Yep.
And that, that's too bad because we had a destination wedding in Bermuda. But whatever, I'm not going to get married in Hyannis just so that,
right.
all the functionals can attend my wedding. But, it was just so stressful.
Yeah.
It was, but honestly, like that is when I sort of said, this is going to be super challenging. This may be the marriage that doesn't make it.
Yeah. Well, you have a very strong, the theme through this and all the things you've talked about so far is you have a very strong family tie. Family is very important to you. That dynamic is hugely important to you.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm guessing it was fairly positive all your life, and you've developed, and you talk about cousins, so it's not even just your immediate family, it's an extended family. And so that dynamic's important to you. That's your stuff. That's important to you. And if you run into somebody who has strained family relationships and essentially wants to be away from the family, I mean, they may or may not be adversarial, who knows, but just generally speaking, no, I'm moving on and my life is better outside of the family dynamic here. My mother's, I love my mother, but, doesn't mean I want to sit with her for 4 hours, that type of thing. But see, that's, because that's such an important part of it to you, you needed to be very wary about what was happening in a partner. There are personality differences that you can work around, but when those personality differences approach your stuff, the things that are really important to you, that's when you have to pay attention to it.
Right. And I have to say, I did luck out with my first husband, Ben's dad. His parents were wonderful. I mean, they've both passed away now. But I was so excited when I got to meet his family, because I always liked that. I always thought that was kind of a fun point, when you get to that point, you can meet somebody's family. And they were like the nicest people. And they were so excited for him. I mean, it was really neat. It was really good. And again, I've probably said it in here before. I tell my clients, the reason why I do what I do is because I didn't have me in my life. I didn't have someone like me that could give really good, solid marriage repair and restoration help. But I do that with my couples. So I'm saving marriages. I didn't have a good therapist, and she never once recommended couples therapy. Not that we probably would have done it with her, but
right.
And knowing what the fail rate is, maybe it wouldn't have worked anyway. But she had my respect and trust. And if she had said to me, "You are missing the boat," and I'm going to tell you why. Coming here every week is great, and we're uncovering a lot of great things, and we're talking about, but what we're doing is we're talking about your husband and your marriage and your unhappiness. And what you really need is to see if you can get your husband to circle in, because I had asked him once before and he said no, but that doesn't mean he wouldn't have said yes.
Yeah.
And he said yes at the end, but by then I was asking him more so that we could try to amicably separate, but I didn't word it that way.
Right. Yep.
I said, I want out and we need to go to counseling. But what I didn't say was, I'm done with this. Can we go to counseling so that we can be friendly when we go through this divorce? That was my bad.
I'm curious about your thoughts, whether this particular part of relationships has improved since online dating, because the online profile presents an opportunity. I'm not sure everybody takes it, but it presents an opportunity to self-evaluate in this way where
right.
I like doing this. I don't, I like doing this. And conversely, while you're figuring it out, you're figuring out, I don't like doing this. I don't need this. I made this mistake last time, or I had this type of partner last time. That's what I'm trying to avoid. It's at least an opportunity to go through that self-evaluation process that we didn't have before online dating. We're just sort of stumbling along. And so this idea of being able to identify what is important to you and putting it down in the 3 or 4 paragraphs in your online profile,
right?
You would think this would help some of these situations,
right? It does, and for me, we do work on that with my clients. And I say, look, it's important to put down certain things. So for my profiles that I create for my clients, one of the things that I do, it's funny that you said that, is I have, in one way, in one shape or another, I am creating a list of things I like and things I don't like. So for example, right now I happen to have clients that don't like to go dancing and clubbing and partying. They don't like to go into Boston.
Yeah.
They don't like that. And which is interesting because they're in their 30s. And, but when we read, and like I have this great client, she's not into like hiking and all kinds of sports. And a lot of the men on these websites are portraying, like, a lot of their pictures are like they're standing next to their mountain bike.
Yeah.
And they're like, lean like a tree. They look like a, skinny little birch tree,
But that's exaggerated to a point because men think that's attractive.
Well, yeah, but they also have pictures of like selfies at the gym. They show a lot of athletic kind of pictures, which I get because, like, if you like to go to the gym, the problem is that's a turnoff for a client of mine that isn't super sporty.
Right.
So for my clients, yes, I find that the profiles are very, they're very specific. So I'm like when I'm asking them, like, I have certain questions that I ask that aren't part of a typical profile. Sometimes the websites will prompt you with questions for your profile.
Yeah.
What would be your favorite date? That kind of thing. So I don't do that. Mine is more obscure things. So like I ask my clients to think back in the past, like when you were like, 20, 25, 30, what were some things that you used to like that you're not doing that anymore? So like for me, if you were to ask me, one of the things that I used to do in my 20s was I used to paint. Right. I did a lot of artwork and things like that. Right. But now I've gotten away from it, obviously. But that would be something that I might put in there because it's interesting. Well, I wouldn't think of it unless Judith said it. So as a coach, I would say to myself, Judith, what was something you did in your 20s? So I would say, well, I used to like to go to comedy clubs because I love comedy. I used to go dancing a lot. And I learned how to do salsa dancing. And I really enjoyed art museums and also painting myself, dabbling with watercolors.
Right.
And if I were the coach coaching myself, I'd say, okay, those 5 things are going to be in your top 10 things that you like to do.
Right.
These are things that you used to do. And wouldn't you like to go back to a museum? Wouldn't you love to go salsa dancing again? Even if you stink at it, who cares?
Yep.
But it's not that every guy is going to say, oh, I really want to do salsa dancing. But there could be some guys that read it and go, geez, she sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Like, you know, she's not saying she was in dance-a-thon professional competitions. She just said she enjoyed salsa. And you know what? I kind of like salsa. I like that kind of music.
Yep.
So she's someone that I find interesting. And once I meet that person, when I talk to them on the phone, they may or may not bring up the salsa dancing. But once I meet with that person and we start talking about our interests, at some point, you know, that's probably going to come up. And chances are the person was already thinking to themselves, that's kind of cool.
But there's also personally in life, there's also the difference between I like to salsa dance and
Yep.
I need my partner to want to salsa dance with me.
That's the thing. They don't necessarily have to, but the fact that they found it interesting.
No, but you have to do that evaluation. You have to evaluate in your mind, is it okay that you like the salsa dance and you can go do it when you want to? Or is it a requirement that your partner be involved as well? I remember Janet, my current girlfriend now, we got serious while she was in California. And she came back for a visit and she goes, meet me at the North Shore Mall. And I, out of hand, I said, I don't know if I've been in a mall in like 12 years. And she's like, what? I goes, no,
Yeah.
I just,
Not your thing, Lou.
I don't go to malls, you know, and but that's the differences in our personality. But we're at the point in our lives where it's like, listen, you want to go to a mall? Go to a mall. You know? And she's like, fine, I will go to a mall, but that's okay because it's her likes. She can enjoy it. She can be in it, but it's not a requirement of hers that I go with her. Right.
Right.
And there are some of those types of activities. Then there are activities that you would like your partner to be involved in. And it's all fine. There are no right or wrong answers, but you got to find someone who's compatible with those differences.
Right. So another example is when I'm working with my clients, I'm asking them all kinds of questions. And so, you know, it's interesting. 2 out of my 3 clients, when I was asking, because they couldn't really think of things that they liked to do. And I'm like, well, that's because as we get older, we tend to get more stuck and we don't bike like we used to. And we don't go to the beach like we used to, right?
Well, wait a second. What's that a sign of? That's a sign of lack of self, right?
It is. So what I'm doing is saying, okay, let's think of things that you used to do and don't anymore, or things that you'd like to do. And sometimes they can't think of what those things are. So I give examples.
Yeah.
So 2 out of my 3 clients recently, when I was going through this process with them, I said, well, what about things like, you know, lake versus ocean? And so they're like, well, I like both. I'm like, okay, that's a little bit undefined. So talk to me about lakes. What lakes have you been to? Do you like, you know, the White Mountains? You know, just talk about that. And then I also talked about the ocean and things like that. So then I talked about, have you ever tried canoeing? Did you ever? Because a lot of times they don't think about an interest because it's something they did once or twice.
Right.
So I haven't skied since my 20s. I don't want to take up skiing again, but let's just say Coach Judith said, well, what about snowboarding or what about skiing? Or I don't care. Do you like to sled? I don't care. Like there's no right or wrong answer. That's not even a wrong answer. If you say you like to go sledding and play in the snow, that's cool. Like this, especially if people have kids or the people you're going to date have kids. Like if a single dad sees that you like to sled and throw snowballs, I mean, heck, you're going to get a like, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Right. So there's no wrong answer. If you like to sled, but you don't like to ski, just tell me, because it's also a funny thing that most people don't rate these kinds of things. The other thing is when I said sailing, I said, so let's think about it. Have you ever gone canoeing? Did you ever go kayaking? Because those are a little bit different. How about sailing? And 2 out of these 3 people recently said sailing. Oh, I've always wanted to learn how to sail. You know, and one of them was like, you know, I've thought about it from time to time, but just, you know, I'm like, this is perfect. I'm going to get you sailing this summer, no matter what. And I'm also going to put it in your profile. I love the ocean and I'm fascinated with sailing. I haven't done it, but I'd love to be somebody's, you know, student, just tell me what to do. I'll be your helper on the boat. I'll be boat girl for a day or boat boy,
But my advice is be careful with that one. You got to be careful with sailing. You got to be careful with skiing. You got to be careful with boating. You got to be careful with horses.
I knew you were going to say that.
There's no halfway in. There's no halfway in with sailing. You start dating someone who owns a sailboat, you're sailing, and you're sailing a lot.
That's true.
There's
people that have boats are always on their boats.
Yeah. Skiers, if you're in your 30s and 40s and you're still skiing, you're skiing every weekend you can. You're driving the 2 hours up to the ski slope and going skiing. There's no once a month with skiing. There's no once a month with sailing. You got a boat, for crying out loud. You get a lot invested in there. You're going out every weekend.
Right.
And that's certainly something you should explore. I think the basics here is
you should explore it though, Lou, because this is the time to try new things. It's like when people say, "Oh, that guy said he likes country line dancing. I'm not going out with him." But that is the wrong attitude, because you may enjoy it. You may enjoy country music, Yeah,
and I recognize this about myself very early in this process, where I'm kind of an inertia guy. I wouldn't necessarily start something new on myself, but a couple times in my life, I've been taken by the hand and going, "We're doing this weekend," and go do it. And I fell in love with it,
Right. It's and that's key. That's the ticket. But
being open to that experience. Yes.
Right. So we're going to have to wrap up, but we'll talk about this more next week, because I think it's important for people to understand that, we should all be striving, as corny as it sounds, we should all be striving to be a better person, and that involves the stamina and the confidence to try new things.
Right.
And I think that that's probably something, instead of saying self-care, I think next week, I'm going to write this down. We're going to talk about, take a chance, try new things.
But I think it's important to distinguish between likes and dislikes and deal breakers. I think
deal breakers too. Yep.
Yep. I think it's important to understand the things that are important to you and the things that are important to your partner, and try to figure out if they're compatible.
Right. Right. I mean, there are deal breakers, but for God's sakes, like, it's not going to kill you to try country line dancing.
Right.
And it's kind of fun.
That's actually not fun.
The thing I like about it is you're not on your own out there trying to create your own stupid moves,
Yep.
They tell you the moves. So, like, even other than screwing up left or right, it's something kind of fun.
We'll continue this discussion next week. JudithJameson.org is the website for contact information, services information, any questions you might have, JudithJameson.org. We'll see you next week.
That's right. Be well, be healthy, everybody.